On the next episode of Painting and Travel, Sarah explores a rural farm in Wisconsin and talks to the owner about raising pumpkins. Roger sets up his easel to create a colorful painting of pumpkins.
Pumpkin season is getting close, and here at Mulberry Lane Farm, I'll have a chance to speak with Farmer Pat up at his field where he grows his pumpkins. Roger has found what he wants to paint just around the corner from here.
Well, since we have that large pumpkin patch just around back, I thought this would make a nice subject, the pumpkin next to this old door. I'm using acrylics this morning and a Masonite board, and earlier I took some burnt sienna and burnt umber and I toned this board. And the easiest way for me to do that is just to mist the board, squirt out a few tubes of color and just smear it around. Now I've taken a piece of charcoal and I've sketched the image in here. And I use charcoal because if it's not quite right, then I can just wipe it off. After I did that, I went over it with a pencil. Now I can wipe that charcoal off, and I still have my pencil lines underneath, and I'm ready to go. I have a large palette of colors today: titanium white, ultramarine blue, cerulean blue, transparent Indian yellow, cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, cadmium red light. So right in this area, I have my three primary colors: red, yellow, and blue. The colors on the bottom here are opaque colors. The colors at the top here are transparent colors, or semi-transparent colors. And here I have three more colors. These are my earth colors: burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, and I have one green, a chromium oxide green. I guess I'll just start by putting in this door. It's kind of rough. Okay, I'm going to do one thing here that's going to give me some interesting texture on this door, and I'm going to wait just a moment or two, and I'm going to spray it with my atomizer, and that's going to apply little drops of water on here. Now when I use this atomizer, if I spray it real hard, I get very, very fine drops of water. If I just spray it sort of lightly, I get larger drops of water, and that's what I want. I want some larger drops of water. Okay, I'm spraying that on there. The drops of water have landed on there. And what's happening right now is those small drops of water are beginning to absorb the wet paint that I just put on here. Now I have to wait a few minutes and let that dry, and then I'll show you what I can do with that. Okay, so I'll let that sit, and now I think I'll start and block in the wall over here, this stone wall. It's basically concrete, but there's stones behind it, and the concrete has been put over it. So those stones kind of bleed through there. They kind of pop through. Now it's a very overcast day today, and it's been very foggy this morning, and I think that's going to hold with us for a while. So I've got some very flat light on my painting, and I like that. But later on, I may decide to add a few patches of sunlight on this. We'll see how that goes a little bit later on. So this will kind of be a dull looking painting to begin with. I'm going to continue with some darks here: ultramarine blue and burnt umber. Got some very darks right under the door. It must be early because those roosters are really being verbal this morning, aren't they? I'm putting in some darks here while I'm still waiting for this darker red to dry. Now the darker red is going to dry sooner than those droplets of water, and that's what I'm counting on. So I'm just doing some other touches here, waiting for that to dry. Give that some rough brush work just to indicate that earth down in there. Okay, I think I'm ready to pick up those droplets of water that I sprayed on there a minute or two ago. Again, what has happened is those droplets of water have absorbed the wet paint that I put on there. Now I'm going to dry my brush off so it's very dry, and with a very light touch, I'm going to drag my brush down, and what's happening is I'm picking up those droplets of water on this brush. I wipe it off, and then with a very light touch, I'm just picking up those droplets of water. And that gives me an interesting texture there that looks like the weathered wood. Now I might be able to do that one more time. Sometimes you can pull it off, sometimes I can't. But I'm going to spray that one more time, and again I'll let that sit for a moment or two, and then I'll go over it again. If I were to wait too long, those droplets of water would dry, and I just wouldn't be able to pick up the wet paint to leave that texture. But this is a very nice way to make texture on a number of things, not just weathered wood like that, but it can work very well on a gravel road or even a tree trunk. While that's drying, let's start with the pumpkin now. Picking up a few different colors, orange here. Now I'm going to make the pumpkin darker than I want it to be because I want to put my darks over my lights, and so the pumpkin can start out darker here, and then I'll lighten as it dries and as I go along. This is very dark in here right now, and that's what I wanted because I want to work my darks to my lights. So I'll start to make that cement look in there, that concrete, and start to bring that up a couple of values. And this brushwork here can just be sort of a rough applied brushwork. I don't want to smooth that out very much because there's a lot of texture in that concrete. It's been here for many, many years. Okay, right on the edge is a nice place here to make that lighter, to define the edge of the pumpkin. Down here, the earth is sort of splashed up against these. So these are darker down here, and they have picked up some color that looks like some mold or just some earthy color. So I'm going to make that darker and put it in some green down in there. Down here we have just a board coming out this way, piece of lumber. And we got some pebbles down here on the ground. So I'll just, with a rough brush, scumble in a little bit of texture there. And I'm going to define some of the more of the rocks down here. And now I can take my dark color. I'll grab my ruler. And I'm just laying my finger on my ruler as a guide, just running my hand up and down there. And at the bottom, this is worn a little bit more, so it kind of gets a little wider. The bottom of these boards have deteriorated more than the tops because the water drains down this way, and the very bottom of the board, it seeps that water up in there and it just rots it. So I'll just, with this flat brush, just make some of those areas here that have deteriorated and rotted away. That's what I liked about this scene here, is it just had a lot of nice character to it. So I'll work on the pumpkin now. Now my Indian yellow is a transparent yellow, and if I were just to put this on here without adding anything to it, it almost just disappears because it's transparent. So I'll take the Indian yellow and add some white to that, and that will make my pigment here more opaque. Now as these go around, these lines get closer and closer together as they go towards the back. Just have to remember to get a nice clean ellipse on those as they go around. Up here at the top, the light is catching this more, so I'll add some white to this red and yellow, make a nice orange color. And I think I'll spray this with my atomizer. And this time when I spray it, it's not for the purpose of picking up those droplets of water, because this is totally dry, so it won't pick up those drops of water. I'm spraying it now because this will help this wet paint flow over the dry paint. Gives it a little lubrication there just to flow over there and blend in with these other colors. Now I haven't used a small brush yet at all. I think in a little while I'll pick up a small brush and use it, but I try and stay with a larger brush for as long as I can. With the dark color, these rocks embedded in the wall. I'll put a little shadow right under those. That'll help to define those rocks. And on the bottom part of these rocks, make it slightly lighter, put a little highlight down there. Even though I'm not really seeing much of a highlight now because it is so very overcast, I think it would be just nice to add a little bit of dimension there. Another thing I can do to add texture to this wood is to splatter some paint on there. Now I have to be very careful when I splatter paint on the composition here, not because I'm afraid I'll get it in a place that I don't want it. It's because when I splatter paint like this, it looks like splattered paint. And I don't want to have that look. But I'll spray the board, and by doing that, when I splatter this, the paint that I splatter on there will sort of soften out because of the damp board. And I'll splatter this paint very thin. That'll give me some dark spots of color in there. Now what I don't want to do is just leave that like spots. So I'm going to let that dry for a few moments, and then I'll kind of do the same thing with a dry brush. I'll drag those out and soften those little spots that I've splattered on there so they don't obviously look like splattered paint. If I left them to look like splattered paint, it would just be too gimmicky, and it would be too much of an obvious technique. There's a tree over here not too far from the pumpkin. It's got some beautiful green leaves right at the base of it. That will add a touch of color, a touch more color. I'm going to add a few of those. And maybe one or two of those leaves on the ground here, right on the dirt. Now I test this out every once in a while to see what's going to happen with those spots that I splattered on there. Some of the larger droplets of paint will dry, of course, slower than the small ones. But I think it's about time now that I can drag those out and soften them. So I'll take this large brush again, be sure it's very dry, and I'll just drag the brush slowly over these. And now those obvious spots of splattered paint become really a part of the painting. You can't really determine that I splattered them. They really blend in with the rest of the composition and add a bit more texture. And I'm just mixing some color here that was already on the board. It's kind of a dull green color. And I'll put a highlight right where these boards are. So we've got a dark spot, sort of a dark crevice there where the boards meet, and then a light highlight on the edge. Okay, let's jump back to the pumpkin now. I'll continue to make that lighter and brighter. I'll just pull these colors right around the top here, and continue to brighten that area of the pumpkin. Now I haven't put in those hinges yet, like I said, so I might as well, I'll put some of those in right now. And I did move those hinges from one side to the other to help the composition. Now I've only used 3 brushes today. I've used these 2 flats. Now I'm going to start with a small pointed brush. So really everything from here on out will be working on the detail. With cadmium red and white, I'll add a few highlights down here, just to continue to add to that texture of the door, because that's really what this painting is all about. It's all about texture. Now earlier I said I might add, those birds are really loud, aren't they? Just right around the corner from this chicken coop. Earlier I mentioned I might add some highlights here to the painting. Hi, kitty. So as if the sunlight were hitting this in 1 or 2 areas. Maybe there's a tree out here, you know, and the sun is diffusing itself, maybe letting some sunlight through. I'm going to put a few spots of color on here as if the sunlight were hitting it. Now, if the sunlight were coming through a tree, it would be very diffused, and these edges around here would be very soft. Here's what's actually happening. As the light comes through the leaves of a tree, it produces this dappled effect on the ground, or like here on the side of this barn. They appear rounded because the source, the sun, is round, and the further away the tree is from the barn, the softer and larger the rounded shapes will appear. Here's an example of the distant tree combining with nearby shadows, creating both soft and harder looking patterns on the wall, which creates a shadow within a shadow. So I place that paint on there, and then with a dry brush, I kind of soften out the edge around there. And maybe a patch or two of sunlight right here on the ground. I hear the first group of children coming to the farm today, so I may have to wrap this up pretty quickly. But I'm going to keep going for as long as I can. We have a little friend here with me, a little farm kitty. This little guy wants to help me paint here. What's your name, huh? A lot of cats here on the farm. They like to get involved. Nothing like a few extra added distractions. I'm going to mix a brilliant orange here. I could put orange out on my palette, but generally the yellow and the red makes a good orange. A little bit more reflected light right on the bottom of the pumpkin. I don't see that light at all, but I'm going to put it in there because I know it will add something to the form and the roundness of the pumpkin. It'll give it some dimension. One more thing I'm going to add here. I've got the pumpkin here, and then I have this door. I am going to add some more color to this door a little later, but right now, I know that if this pumpkin was sitting closer to that door and it were a little bit brighter, the pumpkin would reflect some light in the back of this door. So I'm going to put some of this orange color right in the back of the door here. So what's happening is this pumpkin, the light is bouncing on the pumpkin and hitting the door, and it'll make that somewhat more orange. And also in doing that, it'll give the painting a little more harmony and put those two elements together. Well, I'm going to have to finish this painting in the studio because we have a group of children coming here to visit the farm and to play with the chickens and so on. So I'll put away the paints now and see you back in the studio.
We're standing in the pumpkin patch, one of the pumpkin patches of Farmer Pat Keyes. And in the fall here, in October, it's a primo month for getting your own pumpkin. And this is a family farm, so you can visit it with your children and your grandchildren. You can come out here and you can find just the pumpkin you want and pick it yourself. What I don't know is, how do you grow a pumpkin patch?
Pumpkins are fairly challenging to grow, but the planning starts a few months early, actually, with the spreading of manure. We have a lot of animals on this farm, fortunately. We produce a lot of organic, natural manure. Pumpkins really like that, so we spread manure in these fields. And then we have a specialized corn planter that plants all of these rows, and then we pretty much sit back and watch them grow. We put a lot of variety in this patch. The people who come to visit our farm have to walk pretty far to get to this patch, so we want them to have a pretty nice surprise waiting for them when they get here.
Oh, I like that idea, kind of a treasure hunt. So you go down to the far pumpkin patch and then you can start zeroing in on just which one speaks to you.
And it is amazing how the people will sometimes walk through the entire patch. Mm-hmm. A lot of times they'll go all the way to the back, making sure that they scanned and surveyed the field and that they bring home that perfect pumpkin.
Well, it's a pretty big field here. So about how many pumpkins do you think you would produce from this field?
Somewhere between 3,000 and 4,000 pumpkins per acre. So this field right here is 1.5 acres, 1 2/3 acres. We're going to anticipate somewhere around 6,000 or 7,000 pumpkins in this field right here.
Oh, how fantastic. And you have another field, which is going to have several thousand.
We do have another field, and that is about a 5 or 6 acre field.
Well, if you have an accident and you drop your pumpkin, then what happens to it? Does it go back to the farm, or does it recycle in some way?
Fortunately, most of our animals here eat pumpkins, so we don't get too excited.
Well, now these pumpkins look like they're about half done to me. Where are they in their progress? Do they have a month to go?
Yes, it's in that 30 to 40 day area yet. This patch will be vigorously producing more little pumpkins. I just wanted to mention these plants have female blossoms and male blossoms, and then the bees are extremely important to us. We have a couple of people that have hives within a mile of here, and those bees come up here, and I see a lot of them in the morning, and yes, but we have about 30 to 40 good growing days left in this season.
So they will really bulk up.
They will. They will continue to grow, continue to produce, and yeah, things are looking good in this patch.
Well, they sure are, and I'm glad Roger's going to do a painting of a pumpkin, because then at least I'll have one to take home with me that's ready. Thanks for speaking with me.
Often when I get back into the studio, I discover things that I should have done in the field that I just didn't see while on location. So back in the studio, it gives me a chance to look at it a bit more carefully and make adjustments that will make the painting a bit better. So in this case, I noticed that the painting was very middle tone, and it made a very dull looking painting. So I need to work on the lights and darks, especially the lights in this painting. I also didn't like the way the pumpkin was situated. It was just too sort of up and down, a little static. So I rearranged it a bit here with some chalk, and I'm going to put the top of the pumpkin over to the side slightly. Now, I've done a number of paintings of pumpkins in the past. This is one I did recently, and this is the look I'm going to try and get on this pumpkin here. It has a nice orange glow right here down by the base of the pumpkin, which is really reflected light. And these pumpkins here, this was from a photograph that my sister Janet sent me, and this was an arrangement she had made on the hearth of her fireplace. Well, let me get started on this piece. I don't have too much time left, so let me get started here. I'm going to try and make this pumpkin quite a bit lighter, especially up in the top, sort of to reflect this piece that I had done earlier. Now this dappled light that comes through the leaves of trees, that was very much in effect the day I painted this. So I am going to try and replicate some of that. I think I'll just paint this as a very solid object to begin with, without the bands that go down here. Right down at the bottom, we've got I want to put that nice glow. Put that right in here. And I've got my spray bottle. I can spray that. That'll help those paints flow out. So I can just put a wash on there. Now for some darker colors in the center. Wipe my brush off like this, and then since these two colors are wet, I can blend those with a light touch. Now some of these areas are going to be slightly darker to show that dappled light from the light coming through the trees. It's interesting how some paintings happen so quickly and so effortlessly, and other paintings just become a real struggle. And I can never tell when that's going to happen. Now I think at this point I can put in my stem here. Tip that a little over to the side. Now as I look at this, I can see that it could use even more sunlight up there. Makes this very light yellow color. When I lift up my brush, I just sort of lift it up gently to let that stroke feather out. That's giving it a bit more form than it had while I was painting out in the field. I really just couldn't see that. And you know, there's so many distractions when painting outside at the farm there. There was a busload of children coming into the farm, and so all those distractions sort of add up. Now here in the studio I can concentrate a bit better. I've kind of lost that orange glow that I have in this other painting, so I'm going to put that in again. I'll wipe my brush off, have a dry brush, and then I'll just fan these colors out. Now right below this pumpkin, I think I would have some reflected light from the pumpkin on this area here on the ground. So I'm going to take my red again, give it a quick spray, and I'll echo that orange color right down here below it. Now I'm starting to see some of my lights, darks, and middle tones. And before, the painting was all very middle tone, which made it very dull looking. So this is brightening it up quite a bit. Well, to finish this piece, I'm taking some cerulean blue and white, and I'm putting some cool light on this side of the pumpkin. So that cool color represents light from the sky rather than light from the sun. And it makes a very nice color combination to this piece. I'm adding a few more light patches down here on the ground, and with some warm color, a few more dappled patches of light here in the door, but those are very subtle. Well, I think finishing this painting here in the studio was a real benefit as opposed to trying to finish it completely in the field with all the distractions. This way I got to think about the painting a bit more, analyze it, and put in those finishing touches that the painting needed.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.